Related papers 64 to 70. The Frog, the Toad, and Old Dan Jones. Just because someone has written a book doesn't mean the book's message is on target or the author an authority. Because one talks about the child doesn't mean he has found the child. How does one tell the mystic from the mystic? The genuine from the fraud? The one who knows from the one who says he knows? The one who knows from the one who thinks he knows? There is a difference between these creatures, and it behooves us to know about the wheat and the tares. The child within helps us to see the difference. In Wetumpka, Alabama, or Toowoomba, Mississippi, I forget which, lived a man named Dan Jones who claimed to know the difference between a frog and a toad. Toads hop, frogs leap, he said, and he wrote that in a book. Well, now, generally speaking, that's true, provided one knows the difference between a hop and a leap. When does a hop turn into a leap? What's the difference between a large hop and a small leap? I suspect the difference is about the same as that between a mystic and a mystic, a philosopher and a bullshooter, a person who talks truth and one who lives it. Dan was also considered to be an authority on mushrooms and toadstools, and he wrote about them in a book, too. He told me all about frogs, toads, toadstools, and mushrooms in my early days on the river, and I believed everything he said. One afternoon, after a hard arrowhead hunt, I stopped by his home to show him my latest finds. His wife told me that Dan had passed unexpectedly. Dan, she said, had gone into the woods, gathered the evening meal, and prepared it with his own calloused hands, eaten it, and died of poisoning. She and her son, who were still sickly when she told me the story, had barely survived. The Last Supper, which Dan gathered, prepared, and with which he destroyed himself and his reputation, was frogs' legs and mushrooms. I've thought about Dan a lot over the years. There is a lesson leaping and hopping somewhere in his story. I feel about the truth the way the Jews once felt about their prophets. Let what one says about the truth be what he knows from his own heartfelt revelation, and let what one says about his revelation be said with all the honesty and accuracy possible. Never mind that talking out of spirit stuff that ministers and teachers say is so wonderful when they are standing before their captive audiences. Better that we put our revelations to the test first, and when they have been confirmed, heard in the other ear, we are at liberty to talk about them to everyone. If we believe the spiritual muse can tap into us while we're at work on our journal or delivering the Sunday sermon, then we better accept the corollary that the devil can tap into it as well. I don't think God would consider it distrustful if we put his light, our glimpses, to the test before we tell the world. We'd better. Another Jones boy, probably not related, led several hundred of his followers to their suicidal death in the jungles of South Africa. It is well that we understand there is no external authority in the end. Rather, the Christ child within each of us is the authority we can trust. If an external authority, church, philosopher, government, or whatever, tells us that and gives us words in such a way that we can put them to the test, then we can learn from that source and trust it. The child within us will confirm those words and show us how to live them honestly, to everyone's benefit. About confirmation or proving things to be true. We have glimpses that are wonderful and enlightening. Then, we are to look into the world to confirm those glimpses. The glimpses may arrive today, but it may take a lifetime to see it confirmed in one's tangible experience. How to say this so it won't be misunderstood? Out of the linear way things are comprehended, we've grown accustomed to believing that when the glimpse of truth comes to us, everything will be honky-dory, with never another problem along that line in our affairs. That isn't how it works. It is more like this. One catches a glimmer of something pertaining to supply, say, but instead of our supply needs being filled immediately, we're more likely to have a bout with the very opposite, which is often exactly what is necessary to bring us to put our glimpse to the test. It is intended that we live our glimpses and prove them. The proof is its confirmation, the second coming of the glimpse, so to speak, confirmed in the other ear. Then, and not until then, can we speak with authority about it. However, and please understand, we don't hold back giving our glimpses. We tell them as best we can as glimpses, because they are ours alone to tell and give. But when we publish for the world, we hold our publications within the arena where we have lived the confirmation and heard in both ears. That is, we publish the things we have confirmed internally and externally. I heard about the nothingness of the subtle and arrogant ego more than 30 years ago. I also learned the secrets of the child and the child's equation years ago. But I've been looking for their confirmation ever since, and am just now given the authority to publish them. Let those to whom these words bring insight know that they must still confirm every insight for themselves in their own experiential world, even as I have had to do. There is no presto in the truth, as we all so want to believe. The real of us is on the peak of the mountain, and we live this body in all ways that will confirm that fact of being. Then, about words, thoughts, states, and stages. Dear Terry, the book you are studying, A Guide to Awareness and Tranquility, is much like a primer of subjective thinking. This book cannot sound like that one because I have progressed since those days. Yes, I have suffered enormously in my human affairs, and have gained much because of that. But I must be careful not to leave the impression that suffering is necessary to perceive the truth, even though it may well be. There are entire religious orders that speak to the necessity for personal suffering before one can catch the glimpse. I must not leave an impression in the other direction either, that the truth is gained without suffering. I simply do not know if that is true or not. I have never met a person who has not suffered significantly in one area or another somewhere along the pathway to awakeness. But that does not mean it is an inevitable rule. Another factor, Terry. Those who have come here to study were given all the graphics, formulas, how-tos, and what-I-dids that seemed appropriate when they were here. You already know this, But the light I have awakened to declares forthrightly that the how-tos and the what's I did are not half as important as they seem to be to the intellectual nature of ourself. Listen carefully. There is another state of mind entirely which does the good work of bringing people to wakefulness. I address that state of mind. You tell me, number one, should I write what I write out of that state of mind? Or, number two, should I write what I did to acquire that state of mind? Or, number three, shall I write what that state of mind did for me in my affairs? Or, number four, should I write what that state allows one to see presently? Where's the book that can do all those things simultaneously, Terry? Yet, this new book does most of that if you search for it with more than a single reading. Here's another thought for you. There is a point in one's ongoing development at which subjectivism hits like a ton of bricks. At that time, there are things one vigorously and vehemently chooses not to listen to, usually about suffering and other difficulties. You tell me, Terry, how am I to write and avoid offending those people and their new sensitivities? There is a point along the way when methods take a back seat to perceptions. When one is concerned with methods, the perceptions sound like pie in the sky. When one is viewing perceptions, methods sound like foolishness, because some of the new perceptions seem to do away with the importance of methods. It is terribly difficult to write words that cut through this particular dilemma of religion and metaphysics. Dear Terry, there are enormous problems in writing a book that purports to tell of the truth. Number one, finding the words that are honest at all levels of perception, even though there really are no levels of perception. To do this sometimes requires that strange-sounding absolute language, but not always. Number two, finding the words that do not create false hopes, even though grand hopes are justified. And number three, finding the words, examples, illustrations, how-tos, and what I dids that cut through intellectualism without causing it to rear up in the process, thereby defeating the purpose of the book. Number four, how to do all this and, as if that weren't enough, keep the book philosophically, theologically, metaphysically, and scientifically consistent throughout. And, as if all that were not enough, there is this consideration. How am I to establish meaningful and concrete modes of thought to replace those I would cast down, alter, or destroy? It is easy to attack the things we know can't be right, but not as easy to see what should be there instead. It is one thing to talk about the real self and another to find it. Ah, so, Terry, it is an enormous responsibility, this book we write, like walking a tightrope between buildings. A single misstatement would plunge us straight to the pavement below. I have been led down too many primrose paths to want to do that to others. How-tos can become too specific, causing people to try to do things exactly the same way, which can often be self-defeating. Once I was determined to levitate because St. Catherine levitated when she prayed. You are correct in saying that the enlightened ain't necessarily so enlightened they don't belch like everyone else. I belch with the best of them. Love from Alabama. Journal tending. Thoughts about journal tending. Number 1, journal tending began for me as a respite from the world and at the same time a way to examine my thinking. It eventually becomes a means of talking to God about everything and getting the answers we need. Number 2, we keep our journal private. It's not for others to read. If we keep it to ourselves, we will be more honest in it. That isn't to say we don't share the thoughts that come forth there, because we do. The very purpose of the journal is to open the door to greater communication with the rest of ourself, above and below. Number 3, we don't worry about how well it is written. Journal tending is a means to self-discovery, not an attempt to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Number 4, never mind the pronunciation, spelling, grammar, and all that. Get the thoughts down first. Number 5, phrases and single words can do just as well as whole paragraphs if they remind us of some insight we might one day think about in greater depth and write in more detail. Number 6, never mind neatness unless you are inclined that way. I'm not. 7, especially don't write in elevated, pedantic, or godly language if you don't want to write that way. Try not to write in the jargon of science, metaphysics, or religion, but in the fresh words you'd use with a friend. 8, we write as it is comfortable to write. 9, use plain English. 10, write simply. Number 11, make illustrations. 12, make analogies. Yes, yes, yes. 13, get in the habit of thinking in parables, analogies, similes, parallels, and illustrations. 14, use nonverbal symbols if that helps picture the thought. 15, diagrams are wonderful if glimpses can be put like that. 16, remember, it isn't what we write that ultimately becomes important, but it is the mode of mentation that writing puts us into. Number 17, when you are writing about people, use their names. This doesn't sound like impersonal metaphysics, but you'll see why this is important later. Our insights become our friends, they become ourselves, and we see the people we have insights about bloom in the light of those insights. 18, put dates on all the entries. The reason for this becomes evident later and is very helpful in the years ahead when you are looking back on the birth of an idea. Sometimes, when I go back to an old page of the journal, I write in my current insight about the idea there, noting the date of the new edition. The dates allow us to see our growth right there on the printed page and be astounded. Number 19. Never mind trying to write absolutely. Write normally, as though you were talking to yourself or a friend. This is, in fact, what you are doing, talking with the self. We don't have to use the language of any group. We don't write like Samuel or Eddie or Boehm or Goldsmith, but as ourself. 20. Write on scraps of paper, backs of envelopes, paper bags, or whatever is available when the journal is not handy. Those scraps will amaze you one day. They can be written or pasted into the journal later. 21. You don't have to be meticulously regular in writing in the journal. We write when it seems good to do it, but it is a marvelous way to begin a day. It can set the mood and establish the framework for the day if we choose to let it. And 22, it is a good way to end the day, too, like a good night prayer, if we make it that. 23. Journal tending begins one way and grows into quite something else. Many things else. Books can be written about that alone. History shows us that writers have been the ones who shaped the directions of entire civilizations. Many, if not most, of the founding fathers of this country were journal tenders, and look at what their words have spawned. 24. Those of us who are disposed to begin with ineffability, God, as we write. And if we are faced with problems, we bring that pure principle, God, into those problems. 25. Dialogue writing. Most wonderful part of it all, conversations between God and oneself, or between oneself and the original child within, and eventually between the child and Godhead. The Han discourses are just such writing as I talk to the self within and without. 26. Whether we write a little or a lot makes no difference. It is good to write as much as comes to be written if you have the time. But we understand there are days to write and days to read, days to watch the river flow and the flowers bloom, days to work our tail off and days to rest, days to talk and days to listen. You will find the writing mode of mind becomes constant, whether you are actually holding a pen in your hand or not. 27. We mark certain pages, for instance, on those days when much is coming but we haven't time to write it all. The marked pages are for going back to, under certain circumstances, and finishing later. 28. We mark the flow days. I put a mark in the top corner of such papers because I know there is something special there to be further understood. 29. We mark the days when light occurs. Oh yes, I put a special mark on the top of such papers because whatever was being written is a part of the bridge. And 30. We even mark the very places on the page when light comes. And remember, sometimes the light that comes doesn't seem related to the words on the page at all, and may not be. It was the mode of mentation that allowed the light through. 31. We note the sundry intuitions that comes as we write, over in the margins or wherever we can spot them again. As with the previous entry, those intuitions may or may not be related to the material we were writing about. 32. The journal is especially helpful on down days when we're feeling lousy. A little writing on such days and the juices begin flowing again. Those are sometimes good days to write to a friend because the very thought of that one can be uplifting. That one is us. 33. There are days to write in the journal, days to read it, and days to do both. 34. As I said earlier, but repeat, we keep our journal from the eyes of others who don't know what we're doing. There are exceptions, sometimes, if it seems good to let someone read our special thoughts, but the journal should be kept from prying eyes. It is better to say what is in our journals than to have others read it. The day will come soon enough when our inmost thoughts will be published, and we stand naked before the world. 35. Ask questions in the journal. Try to answer them from the God perspective. This is not to play at being God, but is to let that mind be in us, which was also in Christ. 36. Write as much as possible, especially at first, from the old questioning position. Then dare to answer as the wisdom of God. Why? Because awareness is the wisdom of God. Number 37. Very important. We make 2 glimpse and glimmer sections. One for the ones we can remember from our past experiences. This requires patient recollections, but is a joy to do. Memories of wonderful things come back to us, little things we haven't thought about in years, and don't worry about bad things coming back. We all have a way of being grateful to those things that are over. Or, if they're not over, they tell us what we are to unbind in our experience. The other section is for the new glimpses that begin to happen more and more often as we get into the writing mode of mentation. 38. Journal tending is meditation in the act of happening. 39. Journal tending is the contemplation happening on the spot. 40. Journal tending, if we are writing about the good we see, is prayer, and it can become unceasing. 41. Journal tending is entering into the Shekinah. 42. Journal tending is entering the secret place of the Most High, because it is the doorway to and from our inmost thoughts. 43. Journal tending leads one, allows one, to be in the world but not of it. Who can carry worry about what to do tomorrow when he is writing about the beauty in front of his nose at the moment? 44. Learning to type might be helpful, but the entries must be spontaneous and loose. If you make the switch from a pen to a typewriter, it doesn't take too long until the typewriter no longer stands between you and your thoughts. 45. I can see that a personal computer with a word processing capability would be a marvelous adjunct, especially one with a printer to keep a written record of your thoughts and ideas. It is important to be able to see the whole journal, so to speak, and be able to just open it on those certain days. The computer is especially good for those who are to become published writers. When an electronic typewriter came into my experience, it was a wonderful day, and I blessed the people who helped me buy the Rabbi. The Rabbi is my word processor. Rabbi Moses Goldberg is his name. Processing words is his game. The printer is Mrs. Goldberg. The electronic typewriter that preceded the personal computer is Nellie Magnolia Callahan from Mississippi. Number 46. In the journal, have an ideas out of the blue section. These are ideas for things to do immediately in the world. Number 47. Perhaps have an intuit section. I remember the way continental drift, the effects of weather, cosmology, etc., came to me while I was in the process of writing in my journal. All of these intuitions later proved to be right. Number 48. Have a people to help section. Put 4 stars on this one. Number 49. Have a people to write section 2. 4 stars on this. 50. Journal tending is an interface with the child within and God. It is a holy time because we are right down to the nitty-gritty of living. 51. The journal is the place where the outside begins to become like the inside. Much more about this explained elsewhere in the book. 52. The work in the journal is always supply work for oneself and the world. It is right in the middle of the flow, giving and receiving, receive and give, to God, to mankind, to self. 53. Journal tending is subjectivity in action. 54. Journal tending is balanced activity between inside and outside. 55. Write about things beautiful or tender or childlike, in preference to those things scientific, religious, or metaphysical. Why? Because they are easier and much more fun to write, and do a better job opening us up and getting us into the receptive mode. Number 56. Notice the difference between receptive mode as opposed to the worried mode, fearful mode, struggling mode, etc. The journal helps in all these situations. 57. Journal tending is the place where intangibility becomes tangible. This is explained in detail elsewhere. Number 58. Journal writing teaches us to go to God within and allows the child to express itself outside. And 59. I have found it most helpful to write like this. I write whatever thoughts seem appropriate and honest. Then I read the sentence and listen to it as though I were a listener listening. This is a wonderful way to write, of course, because it immediately permits anyone who can talk to another person to write as beautifully and tenderly as he would carry on a conversation with someone he loves. Remember, the best way to begin a journal is to start a list of glimpses and glimmers. This fits perfectly into the equation, the whole picture of giving and receiving. Dear reader, how many more journal thoughts can you add to this list? There must be 100 that I've missed here. '68. Identity and the genuine community. The physical body itself is the first hierarchy of completeness, to which light flows in time and space. This is to say, our own physical body is the first part of the wake immediately behind the ship, the first grain of sand atop Dashan. In retrospection, in the people, places, and things arena, the last thing we really know is ourself. The first and the last body one has under control is his own. We get ourselves straight, and then comes dominion, birthright, authority. From here grows the genuine community, the harvest the avatars have spoken of. We love our mankind unrestrictedly and give to those who come to us and receive from those who are given to us. We give our glimpses and glimmers to our entire world of people. We receive from everyone God's images and from the world. Balance is perceived as existing in and from Source. Balance takes care of this physical body as this body takes care of its world of people. While I have been very slow learning these things and have unwittingly lived virtually every imbalance to find balance again, I know God tends this body and time until this message becomes clearly written in the world. I am at it, Father. Journal entries. When one becomes nothing of himself, he finds himself and knows himself even as he is known by God. One doesn't need to try working miracles with the truth. Rather, let him try to understand himself, and in the process, miracles will happen. Miracles not bound to the framework of the wanter and needer, the wisher and seeker. It is pointless to do aught but get to know the selfhood made in the image of God. Then, as we know, as nearly as can be known, what God is via that life's self-examination, God will disclose what is necessary as we work to expound the glimpses and glimmers. The community grows then. The companion comes then. The help comes then. 69. Silly solipsism, shouts the preacher. Everything comes to me by way of my own perception, said Hahn. For instance, my own eyes have seen all I have seen. My own ears have heard everything I have heard. Only my fingers have touched whatever my fingers have touched. Every thought I have ever had has been considered or not considered right here within this head as I experience my own sensations. This is self-evidently true for all of us, isn't it? Asked Hahn. No one spoke. Now, I hold a leaf in my left hand and the minister's sacred book in my right. How do I know the book is a sacred book? Is it sacred because the book has words that say it is sacred? How can I believe that? How do I know the Bible is infallible? Because the preacher and his church say so? Because the book says that it is infallible? I look at the leaf. How do I know that it is a leaf? Because I have looked and heard and seen and have become able to discern that it is a leaf and not a stone. Am I able to tell this is a sacred book because I have heard it is not like the other books that exist? Do I believe it is a sacred book because of the beauty and truth I have found there? Or do I believe it is sacred because the teachers and ministers tell me it is, just as their teachers and ministers told them before? Everyone was listening intently, especially the preacher. Where have I determined these things about the leaf and the book? Hahn continues. Within my own head. And how did I learn what I know of the leaf and the book? Within my own head. Can I believe the written word is sacred because the written word says it is? I can believe the leaf is good because I know about leaves. I can believe the leaf is green because it is green. But can I believe the sacred book is sacred because the minister and his church say so, or because the book says so? The preacher was plainly annoyed, but said nothing. If mankind has designed the alphabet to express the principle of words, and if mankind has created the words to speak of ideas and things, can I believe that the words which have been put together and called sacred are sacred because mankind says they are, or because the words say they are? And if the words say that God is the source of the words, how does that make the words any more sacred than the leaf? Is not God the source of everything? The preacher clenched his fists. Hans said, but even if the words are sacred, there is something more sacred than they are. Do you know what it is? The soldier, sitting beside the preacher, threw up his hands in disgust. I don't even know what you're talking about or trying to say, he said. Where do I see the leaf? Asked Han. In your head, the soldier answered. Where do I see the preacher's text? Same place, the soldier said. Where do I decide what shape the leaf has and what color it has? Asked Han. In your thick head, the preacher said. And where do I read the words that say the words are sacred? Han asked. Where you see everything, the soldier answered, inside yourself. And where do I know the leaf is not connected to the tree any longer? Within your question-asking, cantankerous nature. And is that the place where the holy text is read? Yes, the same place, the soldier replied. Have I ever seen or heard of the sacred text or the leaf or anything else outside myself? Perhaps there is a way that information comes directly into the heart, said the minister, without having to go through the senses. Yes, said Han, and where but here within myself would I become conscious of the heart's knowledge? Would that knowledge be within me or within the self of another? Within yourself, said the soldier wearily. If I hold the leaf and ignore it, would I discover its qualities? No, damn it, the soldier muttered. And if I hold the sacred text and ignore it, will I know of the arrangement of words within it? No. So, how can the arrangement of words become sacred to me without my own intent and without my willingness to believe? I suppose that it can't. So, are the words scattered by themselves or with my consent? For God's sake, Han, I don't know. I'm lost. What are you trying to tell us, old man? I am not trying to tell you anything, the teacher answered. I am telling myself something. I see only my own sensations when I see you. And I see only mine when I see you, the soldier said, tired of the matter. I don't know that you see anything, said Han. I know only that I see. Everything meaningful to me begins and ends here as my own sensation. Bullshit, the preacher exploded, unable to contain his anger. This is oversimplified solipsism, pure silly solipsism, just as the theologians labeled it years ago. But there we have it, laughed Han, clapping his hands. The theologian calls it silly because this fact of being insists that nothing is more whole than the awareness within which images appear. Silly solipsism says that an image is an image is an image. What is this Bible but an image? An engraved image I hold in my hand. And which is more holy, the book in my hand or the life that perceives and encompasses and lives that book? The preacher's anger grew. Are you trying to tell me the Bible is not the Word of God? He asked incredulously. It isn't the only Word of God, smiled Han. Oh my God, the pudgy preacher shouted. I can't believe my ears. Are you trying to tell us that the Word of God is not holy? No, answered Han patiently. Everything that is equally divine because everything exists within divinity. But the book in my right hand is no more whole than the leaf in my left, and all things together are not as holy as the whole awareness that sees them. This is contrary to everything I have been taught, the minister said, shaking in rage. But contrary to nothing you have learned, Hans smiled. It is contrary to everything I have learned, you Oriental heathen, raged the preacher. No, Hans smiled broadly. It may be contrary to everything you have heard, but just because something has been heard doesn't mean it has been learned. What we have heard is learned when it has been put to the test and proven. The preacher slapped his knee in frustration. That is how I know the Bible is holy, you fool. I have proven it and proven it and proven it. He shook his head when he spoke. And that is how I know the leaf is holy, said Han. The people sat wide-eyed, awaiting the next blast from the minister. With a visible effort to control himself, he asked, Why are you telling us these ridiculous things? What is your motive? I remind you that I am telling myself these things, the old teacher said, but I say them aloud so my listening selfhood may see that our link to God is direct and doesn't have to be funneled through the words of a book one holds in his hands. My God, man, the preacher began, do you realize what would happen if men stopped believing in the Holy Bible? I am not suggesting that men stop believing in the Bible or any other book, my friend, only that they come to see that their interface with God is direct and not irrevocably tied to the words of any book, nor to a church or anything else. Like you, I have books that are meaningful to me, but my link with the subject of those books is direct, as is my interface with truth. The Bible may point to those stars, but I see them within my own eyes. But the Bible says, the preacher began and stopped. He stood up, pounding his fist in his hand. He glowered at the group. This is the worst kind of heathenism, he said finally. I think all of you are tools of the devil. All of you are deluded. I am leaving before I do anything I will regret. Everyone watched as the minister stormed down the path toward the village. It was not the first time this had happened. Many had come to visit Han over the years, begging his views, only to leave in anger the moment their beliefs were threatened. Han shook his head in sadness. I didn't speak to myself very well today, did I? He said. You spoke very well, Mary replied softly. You just didn't listen. That is our deafness thundering down the path. The minister's fists are clenched around his most cherished illusions. He will be letting them go one day. Perhaps, said Han. Then those who follow him blindly may let them go as well. Human government. Totalitarian governments, right or left, disparage God. Why? Because their control over church people is not complete. Exactly so. Churchdom in the world unwittingly disparages the subjective idea because the people who truly find subjectivism cannot be controlled very well either. The subjectivist is as weird to the common man as the quantum physicist is to the ordinary scientist. Yet, subjectivism discovered and lived will eventually be as catalytic in the human experience and all its institutions and do much more for them, as the subjectivism of quantum has done and will do for the sciences. Unchallenged religion, like unchallenged government, has led to racism, concentration camps, and sycophantic, half-sleeping followers pushed into one holy war after another. Now another holy war looms, perhaps the last. Only the child within us escapes the final oppression of exclusive externalism. I alone am escaped to tell thee, are the words the suffering Job heard. We might note that the marvel of the American system is the citizen's right to challenge external authority when it seems wrong to him, and this right is guaranteed to him in writing by his government. Church government, which generally considers itself superior to human government, would do well to let its lowly members challenge a few of their leaders and some of the Church's ancient creeds and dogmas that have been clearly outgrown. The humanly ungovernable child within us will be up and out one day very soon as linear time goes, and when it is, every organization will be reorganized. I doubt if words that tell of the child within us could be published in the Soviet Union, where external authority is supreme. I know these words I write could not be published by the individual in the Roman Catholic Church or the Christian Science Church without that individual being taken to task. But the child within us is already free of human government, living and moving and having its being in our heart of hearts. Now, the knowledge of the child doesn't mean that we, as the rediscovered child, don't vote or support our church and our country. We don't withdraw from anything. It means more nearly that we are viewed as a peculiar people, not quite so governable by external authorities and their institutions. We will be taken to task by everyone who hears and fears our self-discovery. The prophets saw this coming, as did Jesus. Blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely, for the child's sake. The point being made here, that church governments anywhere in the world, including the United States, are just as dictatorial and demeaning when they feel threatened as any secular government has ever been. The recognition of the child within us is coming soon to challenge all exclusively objective modes of mind. The egocentric turf protectors, the priests, rabbis, and ministers, clutching their numbers, will bellow and shout and bring their houses down on their heads because the people they lead like sheep will perceive that the child is indeed alive within themselves as it is in us. And exactly as the prophet said, great will be the child's reward in heaven, for so persecuted they, the prophets before you. Bottom line, it is natural for the objective world to try to hold to the status quo and to subdue the subjective idea if it can. Subjectivism has been put down successfully by churchdom many times before. It was a subjective uprising within Judaism that gave birth to Christianity. But what do the rabbis teach about the subjective idea today? That it is dangerous. Judaism warns the rabbis, Who would like to explore the deep things of God that subjectivism can safely be studied only with a proven prophet? And what do the organized Christian sects teach of subjectivism? See for yourself, virtually nothing. Now that the physical sciences are in the process of rediscovering metaphysics once more in quantum mechanics, it remains to be seen what they will do with it. But if the past 40 years are an indication, there seems little reason to doubt the prophet's predictions. Perhaps it is poetic justice that it may very well be the concretized egotism of mankind, led by its organizational leaders, ministers, rabbis, mullahs, and priests, who know nothing of subjectivism whatever, who, with their frightened, uneducated flocks, will appear to do the devil's final work of tearing down the houses whose foundations lie on objective sand. Quantum information is arriving now. The world is being flooded with information that is certain to induce new modes of thought if mankind is to survive the upheaval. The old things will certainly pass away. There will be a new heaven and earth to be seen with the eyes, because it is here already unseen. The child within us survives. Those of us who have found that child will be non-judgmental onlookers, doing what we have been given to do to help our new world, and we will do it against great odds successfully. Textbook thinking. When the great theologians came along to speak of Godhead, it seemed to the ordinary churchman that God was in danger of being abandoned. When subjectivism arose among the Jews and crystallized in the community of the Essenes, the threat to the establishment was plain. After the schism of Christianity, the subjective idea was stamped out of Judaism as thoroughly as it could be done. It is interesting that we find no mention of the Essenes in either the Old or New Testament today. As Christianity grew in worldliness, the threat of subjectivism became apparent there as well, and the expulsion of all Gnosticism from Christianity followed. Then came the subjective metaphysical groups who have, in turn, removed all meaningful subjectivism from their own subjective ideas. One of the mental miracles of modern times. But, as it has been shown, all of this is exactly how it was supposed to happen. Throughout history, the child within has been present, here a little, there a little. Today the time approaches when quantum mankind, the tree of life, will be forced to turn within itself and rediscover the child once more. But lo, the very churches charged with leading the way are themselves aimed at a single historic point in time, blind to the child within every man.